plot summary of Brain on Fire: My Month of Madness by Susannah Cahalan. Susannah starts the book by telling about a dream she had in the hospital. She wakes up and finds herself bound. Susannah is upset, and a purple lady tries to make her feel better, but Susannah gets angry and suspicious. She starts to pull the wires off her head and sees an orange band on her wrist that says flight risk. Susannah then goes back to the time when she first got sick. She wakes up one morning with bites on her arm. She thinks that bedbugs did it. The next day, she tries to tell her friend Angela about her bites at work, but her phone rings and she has to stop. When Susannah hears Steve, the editor of the Sunday paper, on the phone, she is shocked. She forgot about their weekly meeting to pitch story ideas. Later, Susannah gets rid of all the articles she wrote to prepare for the exterminator that she had saved. A few days later, Susannah is suddenly overcome with jealousy and decides to read her boyfriend Steven's emails. She spends 2 hours looking through his emails and dresser, but she thinks there's something wrong with her if she's doing this. Then her left hand goes numb, which is just as upsetting to her as being paranoid. A coworker tells Susannah that she should go to the doctor. Dr. Rothstein, her gynecologist, tells her to see Dr. Bailey, a well-known neurologist, when she calls him. The results of Dr. Bailey's neurological exam are normal, so he orders blood tests and an MRI. At the lab, a man helps Susannah understand how the MRI works. She thinks he flirts too much and leaves quickly, leaving her lucky ring behind. After a few days, Dr. Rothstein calls Susannah and tells her that she probably has mono. After a few days, when Susannah feels better, Steven takes her to a concert. Susannah can't eat any of her food, feels sick and dizzy, and says she can't even remember the concert afterward. When Susannah finally tells her parents that she is sick, they are concerned. After a few days, Susannah feels better and talks Steven into going to Vermont with her. She can't ski because she gets scared at the top of the mountain. A week later, Steve asks Susannah to talk to America's Most Wanted host John Walsh. When Susannah walks down the hallway at the New York Post on the day of the interview, she sees that the walls are breathing and the ceiling is growing. Susannah has a hard time keeping up with Mr. Walsh as she talks to him for an interview, and she doesn't remember walking home that night. The next day, when Susannah wakes up, she sees that the billboards in Times Square are bright and moving. She feels like throwing up and just about makes it to work. When Susannah finally gets to her desk, she goes from being angry and upset to being very happy in a matter of minutes, and she cries through it all. That night, Susannah just can't bring herself to eat any of Steven's well-made dinner. Susannah has a seizure when he turns on the TV and falls asleep. Susannah wakes up in the emergency room. She thinks she is dying of melanoma, which she had a few years ago. Steven calls Susannah's mom after the ER doctor says they can't keep her. The next day, Susannah's mother and her husband, Alan, come to Manhattan to try to convince Susannah to move back home to Summit, New Jersey. There, Susannah has more seizures, so her mother brings her back to see Dr. Bailey. He gives Susannah medicine to stop her seizures and calls her a psychiatrist. Medication to treat psychosis is given by the psychiatrist. After a few days, Susannah has another terrible seizure. Susannah's mother makes an emergency appointment with Dr. Bailey, where a nurse gives Susannah an EEG test to check how much electricity is going through her brain. Even though Susannah is obviously sick, she tried to jump out of a moving car on the way to the appointment. The results are normal. Susannah says that her mom is tricking her. Susannah's mom makes plans for her to spend the night in Brooklyn with her dad. Susannah's dad and his wife, Giselle, take her to her apartment before they go back to their house. Susannah says that her dad took her away. When they finally get to Brooklyn, Susannah is tired and hears Giselle call her a spoiled brat. She goes back and forth all night between asking her father to sit with her and telling him to leave the room. She says horrible things to him and thinks he is killing Giselle. Susannah's parents talk in the morning and decide that she needs to be taken to the hospital. They take her back to Dr. Bailey, who says she is having withdrawal symptoms from alcohol but finally finds her a bed at NYU. Susannah leaves the lobby to get a cup of coffee. She has a seizure, and for the next month she doesn't remember anything. Susannah is hooked up to an EEG machine that works around the clock. On the floor for people with epilepsy, her room has cameras that can record seizures. She won't let her dad or Alan into her room, and she thinks the nurses are watching her go to the bathroom. She gets scared and tries to get away. The next day, Dr. Russo and Dr. Siegel look at Susannah, and Susannah's mom likes Dr. Siegel right away. Over the next few days, more doctors join Susannah's team and suggest diagnoses like unspecified mood disorders, unspecified psychotic disorders, or bipolar disorder. She keeps having dreams that people on TV are talking about her, which makes her try to get away again. When the nurses tell her father that she might be moved to a psych ward if she keeps trying to get out, he starts reading every day outside her room. After a week, Susannah's psychosis starts to go away, so the hospital staff plans to give her a spinal tap. At the start of the second week, Susannah starts stuttering and lets her tongue hang out of her mouth. Dr. Siegel tells her parents that the spinal tap shows an infection because the white blood cell count is high. Over the next few days, Susannah's friends come to see her and are shocked by how she looks. Susannah's mom is also shocked to find out that Dr. Siegel is no longer working on her case. Dr. Russo says that a doctor named Dr. Najjar has taken over and would like another spinal tap. The test shows that Susannah has a type of encephalitis because her white blood cell count is much higher than it was in the first test, brain swelling. A few days later, Dr. Najjar finally comes to Susannah's house to introduce himself. He asks her to remember how to draw a clock face. Susannah carefully draws a clock with all the numbers on the right side. This shows that the right side of her brain hurts. Dr. Najjar sets up a brain biopsy and sends blood and cerebrospinal fluid samples from Susannah to Dr. Dalmau, who in 2007 discovered anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis. The hospital gives Susannah tests to see how smart she is and how well she can talk, and she does poorly on all of them. That afternoon, she is given the official diagnosis of anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis and told she needs an ultrasound to check her ovaries for teratomas, which are a type of tumor. During the ultrasound, Susannah has visions, but there are no tumors. Dr. Najjar tells Susannah and her parents about his treatment plan, which he thinks will get Susannah back to 90% of who she used to be. The next day, Susannah's parents and a college friend help her move home. Susannah starts to worry that Stephen will leave her for her friend, but this is a normal part of the healing process. As people get better, they go through the same symptoms backwards. Susannah says she can't describe what it was like to be crazy because she doesn't remember it and didn't know who she was at the time. A few weeks after Susannah gets out of prison, one of Stephen's nephews is scared of her, and she starts to realize that she's changed. During the summer, when Susannah goes to family weddings and parties, she feels ashamed of how she looks. The steroids make her face puffy and have made her gain weight, and how hard it is for her to hold a conversation. People talk slowly to her because they don't realize that she understands them perfectly, she just can't speak well. She has to take pills 6 times a day and doesn't like it when her mother nags her to do so. Her mom also wants Susannah to go to a rehab center to be checked out. Even though Susannah does horribly on some tests, she gets perfect scores on those that test her ability to think critically. This means that Susannah is fighting her body, but her mind is as sharp as ever. During her 3rd time in the hospital for treatment, Susannah starts a journal because she wants to know what happened to her. Her dad helps her with her journal and is shocked to find out that Susannah doesn't remember anything after having a seizure in the lobby of the hospital. He finally gives her the journal he kept while she was in the hospital because he can't talk about what happened. When Susannah's mom finally says that she was afraid Susannah would die, their relationship gets better. Susannah keeps getting better, but she moves in with her mom and Alan for good. This means giving up her freedom to her. Susannah starts making lists and reading to deal with this. She also starts working out to lose weight, but she admits that her obsession with her body was just a way to hide her fears that she would never be the same again. Susannah finally goes back to work in the fall. She writes a few articles at home before going back to work full-time. Steve asks Susannah to write an article about her disease after hearing Dr. Najjar talk about it at one of his lectures. As she looks into the disease, she is shocked to learn that doctors think it's been around forever, even though it was only discovered recently. They think the symptoms that led to exorcisms, especially in children, were caused by the disease. She also talks to Dr. Bailey, who has never heard of the disease. After the article comes out, Susannah's inbox is full of emails from people who either have the disease or have family members who do. Susannah says that she only remembers her hallucinations from the hospital. Doctors say this is because the brain makes hallucinations, so they are more important because they come from the brain. As Susannah continues to get better, though, she starts to notice that some things remind her of her time in the hospital. Susannah goes back to the hospital 2 years after she was released. At the nurse's station, she runs into the purple lady, and the nurse hugs her. The nurse was real, but Susannah's first hallucination was not. A year later, Susannah goes to NYU to see a patient who Dr. Bailey sent there.
About the author. Cahalan was born in the New Jersey town of Summit. When she was a teenager, her parents split up, and both of them remarried. Cahalan went to school in St. Louis and studied journalism at Washington University. As a teenager, she worked as an intern at the New York Post. In 2008, she was hired full-time as a reporter. In 2009, she got sick out of the blue with anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis, a rare autoimmune disease. She was the 217th person in the whole world to be told she had the disease. Cahalan got better completely, and after writing a first-person account of her experience for the New York Post, she turned that article into her memoir Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness. Cahalan's sickness and her good fortune in getting a diagnosis made her want to tell her story to as many people as possible. In December 2012, she and 2 other families whose children also had the disease started a non-profit group called the Autoimmune Encephalitis Alliance. The goal of the alliance is to teach both patients and doctors about the disease and to put current patients in touch with people who have already been through it. Cahalan married Stephen Grywalski in 2015, and the couple lives in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.